Missandei stood on the ramparts of the Red Keep, gazing down at the city that had once been the site of so many triumphs and tragedies in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. The sprawl of King's Landing extended in all directions. Crooked streets where children scampered after stray cats, markets that roared with a clamor of haggling voices, estates of the wealthy perched behind high walls, and hovels stacked one atop the other in the poorest wards. The Blackwater Bay glittered in the distance, reflecting the midday sun as ships large and small bustled in and out of the harbor. A mild breeze carried the pungent mixture of salt and sewage, rotting fish and horses, smoke and dust, the unlovely perfume of the capital. If anyone had told her years ago, when she was just a frightened child in Noth, that she would stand here, free, and hold the strings of so many fates in her hands, she would have dismissed the notion as a fever dream. Yet here she was, with the weight of knowledge pressing in her mind, secrets gleaned from her time beside Daenerys Stormborn, and talents honed beneath the gaze of the most cunning minds in Westeros. She wore a gown of simple elegance, dark blue samite, embroidered with a subtle silver thread that formed twisting, fluid shapes reminiscent of the unsullied sigil. She found it ironic that she still maintained the motif of Daenerys' forces, even though her queen was gone now, lost to the violence that had scorched King's Landing and altered the destiny of all who survived. But Missandei chose her attire carefully, always remembering her roots. Her real power did not lie in outward displays of wealth or station. It lay in knowledge, in the invisible webs of influence that she had spun since the moment she realized Daenerys' iron-fisted conquest might not survive the queen's own tragic fall. She remembered the day she had arrived in King's Landing, traveling with Daenerys' army, full of hope and righteous conviction. That day felt like a lifetime ago. She recalled how certain she had been that, with Daenerys' rightful claim and the might of dragons, the city would bend. Now, King's Landing bore the scars of a queen's wrath and the final confrontation that ended with Daenerys slain upon the rubble of her own dreams of liberation. Everything had changed afterward. The power vacuum was immediate. The lords and ladies of Westeros, battered by war, exhausted by the strife against the White Walkers and the Targaryen conquest, sought any path back to stability. When the dust settled, lines of succession, old promises, and new ambitions clashed. Missandei, freed from her collar by Daenerys long before, found herself afloat in a realm as treacherous and unpredictable as the seas that once carried her away from her home. She had never been one to seek dominion or power for herself. She had served Daenerys faithfully, more devotedly than she had ever thought possible. But in the chaos following the queen's death, Missandei realized that survival demanded cunning. She could not afford to be a victim of new masters, nor a hapless bystander. Perhaps a part of her felt Daenerys' lessons, of breaking chains and forging one's own destiny, compelled her to act. Another part of her recognized the legacy of her own life. First a slave in Noth, then a property of the good masters in Astapor, then a companion to a would-be queen and the translator of countless negotiations. Information was her coin, her shield, and her sword. In the weeks that followed Daenerys' fall, Missandei navigated the wreckage of alliances with an unassuming grace. It was easy enough for the powerful to overlook her. Though she had been Daenerys' closest confidant, she lacked lands or titles, commanded no swords, and possessed no family name that could rival the great houses of Westeros. It was a mistake that many learned to regret. Bit by bit, she gathered the scattered remains of Targaryen loyalists who had no strong leadership after Daenerys. She spoke quietly to courtiers in the Red Keep, forging small friendships where none had existed, offering bits of intelligence gleaned from her time translating for the Queen of Dragons. She cultivated relationships with servants and guards who still respected the memory of Grey Worm and the Unsullied. When she learned that Grey Worm had taken some Unsullied and departed Westeros entirely, his heart too broken by Daenerys' demise, she did not beg him to remain. She merely bowed, tears in her eyes, and wished him peace. In truth, his departure provided Missandei with a new and sudden independence. She would always care for him, love him in a way that transcended simple loyalty. Yet she also recognized that his moral code and sense of honor might have clashed with what she felt compelled to do in the future. Grey Worm was a straightforward soldier, shaped in discipline and unwavering in his devotion. Missandei was something else now. A cunning survivor in a pit of vipers. Her first major step came by necessity. She had to protect herself from the predatory glances of men like Littlefinger. Had he survived the war, he would have made moves against her, she was certain. But it was Varys, or rather the spider's network, that lingered even after his demise. The realm was full of whispers, and she discovered that fragments of Varys's old spy web still existed. A lingering apparatus that now sought new patrons. Missandei found herself in a curious position. She was intimately familiar with many of the Queen's secrets, with the intimacies of Targaryen alliances, and yet she was free of official allegiances after Daenerys's defeat. Those seeking to gain from the old spider's web recognized in her a potential buyer or broker of knowledge. Over nights of candlelit conversations in hidden alcoves, Missandei began to piece together bits of the once mighty intelligence structure that Varys had commanded. Some of Varys's little birds, children, servants, and small folk, had seen her with Daenerys or recognized her gentle presence in the halls. They felt she was more trustworthy than many other would-be masters, if only because she did not sneer or treat them as disposable. Patiently, delicately, Missandei gathered them under her protection. She learned to be careful. Nothing in King's Landing came without a price. Paying bribes to feed children or secure a guard's silence drained her meager coin. For a time, she relied on funds squirreled away by Daenerys' stewards in the early days of the siege. She found one or two sympathetic bankers in the city who saw potential in the soft-spoken woman with a silver tongue that could speak half a dozen languages. In this, Missandei realized she had an edge few possessed. Braavosi traders, Pentoshi magisters, Lyseni captains, even the Dothraki who lingered in Westeros uncertainly, they all had tongues. They all needed an intermediary. She was fluent in the common tongue, High Valyrian, the languages of Slaver's Bay, and bits of the dialects from the Summer Islands. She quickly transformed her linguistic prowess into currency, forging deals that might otherwise have floundered on the rock of mutual incomprehension. As the small council took shape under a new monarchy, whomever had managed to secure the throne after the chaos, it hardly mattered. Missandei carved a niche for herself. She was no official part of the court, not a master of whisperers nor a master of coin, but she hovered around their dealings like a wraith, quietly gleaning intelligence. She had the advantage of not being recognized as a threat. So many viewed her as a remnant of Daenerys' entourage, a curious but harmless figure who had once served as translator. Now, if a Braavosi envoy stepped into the throne room to negotiate, Missandei was called upon to facilitate. If a delegation from Meereen came seeking to re-establish trade pacts cut off by the turmoil, Missandei was asked to interpret. And so, from the vantage of perfect neutrality, she became privy to the heart of many negotiations. It soon became clear that there were gaps in the monarchy's knowledge. No single spymaster had yet arisen to replace Varys. The city's underworld had been badly shaken by the war, and so too had the merchant guilds. Littlefinger, had he lived, would have capitalized on this vacuum, weaving new webs of debt and dependency. But he was long dead, having met his fate in the north. Grand Maester Pycelle and others of old influence were also gone, replaced by lesser-known faces whose inexperience showed. Many of them did not know how to manage the capital's labyrinth of bribes and social ties, nor did they fully grasp the complexities of overseas trade alliances. Missandei, quiet, watchful Missandei, found that the city was hers for the taking if she could play her cards right. She was not naive, though. She knew that others would attempt the same. The path to the apex of whispered power in King's Landing was littered with the bones of dreamers who had aimed too high, or had too little cunning, or too little ruthlessness. She steeled herself. She had seen war, death, and heartbreak. She had survived the fall of Astapor and Meereen, the betrayals of Yunkai, and the conquest of King's Landing. She had stood on the front lines of negotiations with slavers and warlords who might have thought nothing of snuffing out her life. She had served a queen whose rage shook the foundations of the city. If she could survive all that, she could surely navigate the world of courtiers and conspirators. She found her first ally in a most unexpected quarter, a minor noblewoman from Dorne who had come to King's Landing in the aftermath of hostilities. This lady, unnamed in many official records, had an ear for gossip and a keen sense of survival. Her name was Nemela Santigar, and she recognized Missandei's potential when she saw how effortlessly the translator brokered a peaceable conversation between a Bravosi captain and one of the new council members. Nemela approached Missandei in the corridor outside the throne room, remarking with a hint of a Dornish accent that Missandei had a gift for diplomacy. Missandei merely smiled, uncertain of the woman's angle. But Nemela proved to have a genuine interest in forging a secure trade route that would bypass some of King's Landing's stifling taxes, and Missandei facilitated discreet meetings for her with potential partners in Essos. In exchange, Nemela introduced her to lesser Dornish lords who were also seeking advantage in the capital. From there, Missandei deepened her web. She told no one of her ambition. Did she fully know it herself at first? She told herself that she was merely securing her footing, ensuring she would not be cast aside or used as a pawn. Yet each bit of knowledge she gained, each piece of leverage she collected, felt like a step upward on an invisible ladder. She could see how Varys must have felt as he ascended from an urchin in the free cities to the spymaster of the Seven Kingdoms. Secrets were a currency more potent than gold, and she had a gift for coaxing them out without raising suspicion. Small folk and highborn alike grew comfortable with the bright-eyed young woman who spoke softly and asked the kind of questions that revealed entire worlds of hidden truths. She moved gracefully through gatherings, whether they were raucous feasts in the great hall or clandestine dinners in a wealthy merchant's villa. She listened to rumors about the newly anointed king. Some said he was a figurehead, a puppet of the lords. She listened to the complaints of the commoners, who felt their suffering had not ended with the Targaryen queen's downfall. She took in talk of rebellious lords in the Riverlands, of ironborn raids along the coast, of fresh tensions with Dorne or the Vale. All of it she wove together into a tapestry in her mind, constructing an ever-growing map of the realm's power points. She seldom gave direct counsel, but when asked, she was precise and measured. Her roles as translator and emissary allowed her to travel beyond the Red Keep's walls, venturing into the city's more dangerous corners, Flea Bottom, the Street of Silk, the waterfront, where she found information that never reached the ears of the new hand of the king or the other council members. At first, Missandei found it unsettling to navigate these squalid areas without an armed escort, but she quickly learned that an escort often drew more attention. Wearing a simple cloak with the hood drawn low, she could pass among whores, gamblers, and cut purses unnoticed. She learned to carry a small dagger just in case. Most times, though, she had no need to use it. She discovered that the hungry eyes of a street urchin or the practiced cunning of a pickpocket could be disarmed by a kind word and an offered coin. In the taverns, she would quietly observe mercenaries boasting of their kills, or lesser merchants lamenting how the city watch demanded yet another bribe. In the shadows, she would see outlines of new powers rising, new alliances forming. Sometimes, she recognized that these men and women had no idea who she was. Even if they suspected she was more than a random patron, they rarely guessed at the scope of her connections. Gradually, Missandei began to shape the flow of rumor. She planted suggestions in the ears of barkeeps and street vendors, rumor-mongers who would repeat them. Perhaps House Tyrell was not as diminished as many believed. Perhaps the new monarch had refused to pay certain Lannister debts. Perhaps the gold mines of Casterly Rock were nearly depleted. These tidbits were gleaned from half-truths and speculations, but Missandei knew how to sugar them just enough to make them irresistible. People in King's Landing thrived on scandal and suspicion. She rarely lied outright. There was little to be gained by weaving baseless tales, but she carefully chose which truths to reveal and how to frame them so that the unscrupulous could run with them in whichever direction best suited her. The chaos that ensued from a well-placed hint often allowed her to claim some advantage. Soon, a few of the more observant individuals in court began to realize that this quiet translator was becoming quite adept at gleaning valuable intelligence. Lords and ladies who once ignored her now saw her as a way to gain knowledge about their rivals. They would approach her discreetly. "Missandei, you have such a way with the foreign envoys. What news do you hear from Pentos?" Or, "Missandei, you must have overheard something about the trouble in the Crownlands. Surely you can share a bit?" She would smile demurely, speak a few measured words, and accept small tokens for her trouble. As the tokens piled up, she found herself holding promissory notes, small chests of gold, or even shipments of luxury goods from Essos. She became less reliant on the precarious generosity of local bankers. Her business, if one could call it that, was knowledge, and business was booming. Yet Missandei was careful. She remembered Varys's downfall, how he had miscalculated Daenerys, how his plots had unraveled in the face of the Queen's fury. She remembered Littlefinger's end, how his own ambition had turned allies against him. King's Landing was littered with the corpses of those who soared too high too quickly. She would not be a brazen spider spinning webs in every corner for all to see. She chose her confidants with the utmost caution. She accepted that a certain share of her secrets must remain locked away. She learned to feed the monarchy only those bits of intelligence that would keep them thinking she was a valuable asset. Nothing more. The new monarch's master of whispers, a timid man named Adrian Mills, was plainly unprepared for the role, having been appointed more for family connections than skill. Though he was jealous of any perceived rival, he quickly decided that Missandei could be a useful adjunct. He paid her for small tidbits, not grasping that she reserved the choicest morsels for her own ends. In time, it was not a question of if Missandei would overshadow him, but when. The moment arrived when a confrontation erupted between the monarchy's men and a group of disenfranchised Targaryen loyalists in the city. The loyalists, mostly small folk who had believed Daenerys' promises of a better world, were rumored to be rallying in secret. They scrawled graffiti on walls, images of dragons, or simple phrases like, "breaker of chains." These rebels were not necessarily armed insurrectionists, but the monarchy saw them as a threat. Adrian Mills tried to root them out with the City Watch, which only further inflamed tensions. It threatened to boil over into violence in Flea Bottom and the surrounding slums. Missandei had been quietly watching this movement for months. She had sympathies with many of them, after all. Daenerys had once liberated her from the yoke of slavery. However, Missandei also recognized that an open rebellion would lead to a bloodbath. The monarchy would crush them, blame outside agitators, and likely pass new draconian measures that would further harm the city's poor. There was no victory to be had in that rout, and so she orchestrated a meeting between two of the rebel leaders and a moderate official in the crown's bureaucracy, a man named Harry's Broom who was known for his reluctance to use violent crackdowns. Under Missandei's mediation, they hashed out a clandestine compromise. The rebels would cease publicly advocating the restoration of Targaryen rule, and in return, the monarchy would, through Broom's department, sponsor some relief in the slums, bread distribution, a small tax relief for certain trades. It was an imperfect solution, but it averted bloodshed. The surprising resolution to this crisis took the crown's inner circle by surprise. Adrian Mills had no idea how it had been brokered. The master of whisperers was left stammering when questioned by the monarch's hand, while Missandei kept her own involvement silent. Instead, those who knew the truth spoke of a mysterious mediator who had negotiated the peace. Whispers flew around the court, and some knew that Missandei had been present. Gradually, the rumor formed. She was the figure who had orchestrated the entire affair, saving the city from civil strife. More than one courtier was impressed, and a few looked at Missandei with newfound caution. Adrian Mills was furious, though too timid to confront her directly. Still, Missandei maintained a graceful humility. She made sure to let others believe she had done no more than a small favor for both sides. She showed no outward desire for recognition or thanks, which made the crown's people all the more interested in her. A few even suggested to the hand that Missandei be formally recognized or given a small court title. She demurred politely, not wishing to bind herself to any official position. What use was a fancy title if it came with obligations and scrutiny? She found she could accomplish far more operating unofficially, flitting around the edges of power, weaving new connections. The months passed and her network expanded. Subtly, she integrated some of Varys's old little birds into her personal apparatus. Not as a lord or lady, not even as a spymaster in name, but as a friend and protector. She provided them with small coins, safe haven from abuse, and a sense of belonging. In exchange, they reported to her, not to the Red Keep, about the happenings in the gutters of the city. Others, too, came to rely on her. She found that traveling envoys from Volantis or Karth felt far more comfortable dealing with Missandei than with arrogant or xenophobic Westerosi lords. She became a conduit for high-level negotiations on trade tariffs, shipping routes, and more. Scribes in the administration would sometimes marvel at how deals were struck with so little friction once Missandei was involved. The monarchy's officials wrote this off as Missandei's charm or skill with languages. But Missandei knew that the real reason was trust. People trusted her because she understood them. She had once been enslaved. She had tasted fear, desperation, and heartbreak. She had also seen victory and glory alongside Daenerys. She could empathize in ways that no highborn Westerosi could. Men from the Summer Islands saw a face more like their own, and they lowered their guard. Essosi slavers might mistake her quiet for submission, which she then weaponized. In the end, each conversation left her with more knowledge, more leverage, and that, in King's Landing, was true power. At length, Missandei's path crossed with Cavo Nogary's, a cunning banker from the Iron Bank of Bravos. Cavo was a short man with a sly smile and eyes that glinted with perpetual calculation. He had come to King's Landing to negotiate a new line of credit for the crown. The wars had bankrupted the treasury multiple times, and the monarchy was desperate for Bravosi gold to maintain basic functions. Cavo, however, was not content with simply extracting interest. He wanted concessions, favorable trade for Bravosi vessels, the relaxation of certain mercantile restrictions, perhaps even a foothold in the Westerosi banking sector. The Master of Coin balked at these demands, and negotiations stalled in acrimony. That was when Cavo requested Missandei's presence. He had heard rumors of the translator who had once served Daenerys, rumored to be well-versed in Essosi languages and politics, rumored even to have extensive knowledge about the resources that once backed the Targaryen push for the throne. Indeed, Missandei knew of hidden gold caches in Meereen, left behind when Daenerys fled the city, and of the old agreements Daenerys had made with the Second Sons and other Sellsword companies. She recognized that Cavo was fishing for any advantage or hidden asset that might be used against the monarchy. Rather than reject his insinuations outright, she engaged him in polite, meandering conversation. She acted interested, though not too eager. She let slip that she might know a few things about old Targaryen funds. She carefully measured his reaction. As the hours passed in the corner of a lavish private chamber in the Red Keep, she teased bits of knowledge about various Sellsword captains who might hold partial debts or hidden claims. Cavo listened intently, a hungry glint in his eye. In the end, she agreed to facilitate an introduction between Cavo and a Pentoshi merchant prince rumored to hold the remnants of Daenerys's war chest. Whether or not this merchant prince truly existed, or whether he actually had those funds, mattered less than the fact that Missandei was controlling the narrative. By leading Cavo down the path of potential Targaryen gold, she gained influence over the shape of the negotiation with the Iron Bank. She intended to steer Cavo into a more favorable arrangement for the monarchy, one that would reduce the chance of further conflict and crippling debt. At the same time, she would secure a private line of credit for herself through a Bravosi affiliate, a side arrangement that Cavo, eager for her cooperation, would be happy to facilitate. It was a delicate dance, and Missandei knew that a single misstep could lead to her being branded a traitor by the monarchy or a liar by the Iron Bank. She proceeded with care, employing a tactic she had learned from Daenerys's approach to the slaver cities. Appear open to compromise, but never show weakness. She did not promise Cavo more than she could deliver. She hinted that if the monarchy refused to budge, there were other powers in Westeros, such as the Vale or the Reach, where Cavo might secure new partners. She also let it be known, in subtle ways, that she had enough credibility in Essos to open negotiations with other financial institutions if the Iron Bank grew too greedy. In short, she let Cavo see that her loyalty was not easily bought, but her assistance was invaluable. It was enough. The negotiations ended with an agreement that was widely considered a success for both the monarchy and the Iron Bank, and Missandei's personal arrangement went unnoticed. As Missandei's renown grew, so did the potential dangers. King's Landing was never a safe city for those who rose to prominence in the shadows. Rival informants might try to discredit her or quietly eliminate her. She took precautions, hiring a small cadre of protectors. Unlike Littlefinger's gold cloaks or Varys's personal network, she did not rely on large numbers. She chose a handful of men and women. Some were freed unsullied who had remained behind, uncertain of their place after Grey Worm left. Others were former Dothraki who struggled to adapt in Westeros. She also recruited a few Westerosi street toughs who had proven loyalty by protecting her from potential threats. She paid them well, but not lavishly, and she treated them with a surprising kindness that engendered fierce devotion. One night, Missandei was returning from a covert meeting in the city when she sensed a presence following her down a narrow alley. She had chosen a route away from prying eyes, but perhaps that had been a mistake. The steps behind her grew louder, purposeful. Missandei tightened her grip on the hidden dagger beneath her cloak, her heart pounding. She had known such moments of tension before, but not alone. Usually, she was accompanied by the Unsullied or someone else. Now, she regretted slipping away from her bodyguards for this rendezvous. She considered running, but her pride and sense of caution told her to face this threat. She emerged into a small open courtyard beneath a broken lamp. Slowly, she turned. A figure stepped out of the shadows, clad in dark clothing, face obscured. He did not speak, but raised a blade. Missandei stood her ground, a tremor in her legs, not letting her voice betray her fear. She demanded he show himself. Instead, he lunged. A slash of steel cut the air. Missandei narrowly dodged, feeling the rush of air near her cheek. She stumbled back, pulling out her own dagger, which felt so small and feeble compared to the assassin's blade. Just as he prepared to strike again, two of Missandei's hidden guards appeared from a side passage, a man and a woman, both armed with short spears reminiscent of unsullied weaponry. They engaged the attacker, exchanging swift blows in the moonlight. Missandei pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding as the clang of steel on steel echoed around her. The skirmish was over in seconds. Her guards were skilled, and though the assassin fought fiercely, he was outmatched 2-1. Bleeding from multiple wounds, he collapsed. The female guard delivered a final blow that stilled him. Missandei rushed forward, ordering them to restrain him if possible, but it was too late. He lay dying on the cobblestones, blood pooling beneath him. She knelt by his side, pulling back his hood. She found a face she did not recognize, a hard visage, older, scarred. She asked him who sent him, but he only gave a rasping breath, a sneer, and spat blood. Then he died. The grim reality set in. She had nearly been killed by someone's hireling. Whether it was an agent of the monarchy, or a rival from the underworld, or some lord she had quietly crossed, she did not know. The City Watch might label it a random mugging, but Missandei knew better. In King's Landing, nothing happened by chance at this level of violence. She felt cold dread creeping over her. She realized that with her rising influence, the shadows were closing in. One misstep could end her. She had the body quietly disposed of, paying an urchin boy to wipe away the traces of blood. She told her guards to speak of it to no one. She spent a sleepless night in a safe house she kept near the mud gate, going over her network in her mind, trying to guess who would dare such a move. The next morning, she resolved to tighten her security and retaliate. She did not trust the City Watch. Instead, she would rely on her own network. She quietly put out word among the street informants that she wanted to know of any sellsword newly arrived in the city, or any contract for a woman matching her description. Within days, one of the little birds returned with a rumor that a gold-cloaked sergeant had been seen meeting with a foreign sellsword in a dockside tavern. The sellsword had asked about Missandei's comings and goings. The rumor pointed to an ambitious lord close to the monarchy, one who might fear her growing clout in the negotiations with Essos. Rather than confront him directly, Missandei used subtler means. She had compiled a file of incriminating information about that lord's past dealings. Suspicious shipments from Lys, possible skimming of crown funds, hush payments to certain whores. She leaked just enough to the Master of Laws that the Lord's name rose to the top of an investigation. The resulting scandal forced him to resign from the small council in disgrace. He never knew that Missandei was behind his downfall. For now, it served as a warning to others. Attempts on her life would not go unanswered. Her calm vengeance did not go unnoticed among those with eyes to see. Whispers circulated through court. She is more dangerous than we realized. People began to liken her to Varys for her network, and to Littlefinger for her quiet accumulation of influence. Some scorned her as an associate upstart, forgetting that she had once stood beside Daenerys Stormborn. Others regarded her with respect, seeing the skill it took to maneuver so gracefully in a city that devoured those without cunning. A few, particularly among the small folk, admired her efforts to keep a measure of stability and relief flowing into the worst-hit neighborhoods. Missandei, for her part, was well aware that fame and infamy often walked hand in hand. She needed to proceed with caution. Her rivalry with the monarchy's master of whisperers became an open secret. Adrian Mills spent a great deal of time complaining to the Hand about her unregulated activities, insinuating that she was amassing blackmail material on the entire court. When pressed for evidence, he had little to offer but hearsay. Meanwhile, Missandei's successes in mediating important trade deals and preventing violence in the streets were plain to see. The Hand, exasperated, chose to rely on Missandei's help on numerous occasions, while politely asking her to share information with Mills for coordinated efforts. Missandei acquiesced in principle, though in practice she fed Mills only selective scraps. The man was petty, incompetent, and envious. He was not a threat in the same manner as a cunning foe might be, but if left unchecked, he could become a nuisance. By then, Missandei had made the acquaintance of a new ally, a wry man known as Ser Kellen Buckwell. He was not highborn, but a knight from a minor crownland's family whose fortunes had waned. He had served in the wars, knew the smell of death, and was disillusioned with the petty intrigues of King's Landing. He recognized in Missandei a woman of remarkable conviction and intelligence. Their relationship began on a purely professional level. He offered discreet protective services, and she gave him a place in her developing network of trusted associates. Over time, they formed a bond built on mutual respect. Ser Kellen became a kind of discreet enforcer for Missandei. She disliked the thought of ordering violence, but in King's Landing, moral purity was a luxury ill-afforded. She needed someone who could handle tasks that might require a strong arm. Kellen, for his part, did not relish brutality, but he believed in Missandei's vision for a more stable realm and a better life for the small folk. He found that a cause worth fighting for. Together, they orchestrated a careful pushback against the more vicious elements in the underworld. If a criminal gang terrorized local shops or extorted the poor, Missandei might subtly tip off Kellen, who would ensure the city watch made an arrest, or that the offending gang vanished if the watch was too compromised. Missandei's intention was not to set herself up as a crime lord, but to foster a semblance of order. It also helped her maintain the trust of the small folk. As they saw their neighborhoods become safer, they became more willing to share information. Missandei's network grew, weaving upward through the city's strata. Political developments continued to swirl. The monarchy faced renewed tensions with the north, where the memory of Daenerys' war and the conflicts with House Stark had left scars. Dorne tested the crown's resolve with border skirmishes on the Prince's Pass. The Iron Islands demanded autonomy. Through all this, the small council squabbled, seeking to keep the realm from fracturing. Missandei observed each crisis with the detachment of a seasoned operator, but her heart was not unmoved. She remembered Daenerys' dream of breaking the wheel, of forging a new order. Now that dream was ashes, but perhaps some aspect of it could live on. Missandei did what she could to guide negotiations toward peace. She used her influence with the Braavosi and Pentoshi envoys to dissuade them from financing rebellious lords. She quietly urged moderate voices in the crown to adopt conciliatory measures with the north, so as not to spark another war. In time, the monarchy recognized her contributions. The Hand invited her to a private dinner in the solar of the Red Keep. It was a modest affair, just the Hand, a few key advisors, and Missandei. They spoke of the realm, the precarious alliances, the rumor of a Targaryen pretender in Essos. The Hand asked Missandei for her counsel. Missandei, speaking with measured composure, advised caution and diplomacy over force. She argued that the realm was too fragile for another large-scale war. She also offered her service as an intermediary with the lords and sellsword companies in Essos, should the monarchy need to dissuade them from supporting any pretender. The Hand listened, intrigued, and tentatively accepted her help. As she left that dinner, Missandei felt the swirl of conflicting emotions. Once, she had stood in that same castle at Daenerys' side, believing the Iron Throne would be the seat of a benevolent ruler who would free the world from tyranny. Yet here she was enabling a monarchy that was, at best, a patchwork of compromise. She could not help but feel a pang of sorrow at how things had turned out. But she also recognized that Daenerys' downfall had taught her harsh lessons about power and the cost of absolute rule. Perhaps, in her own quiet way, she could do more good from the shadows than Daenerys had done in the spotlight. Word reached Missandei of new developments in the east. Supposedly, the Dothraki hordes that had once followed Daenerys had fractured, with some returning to Essos, others remaining in scattered warbands across the continent. Grey Worm and the Unsullied, it was said, had settled on Noth, determined to keep the peace there and protect her people from slavers. Missandei often thought of him, wondering if he had found a measure of serenity in that paradise island, plagued as it was by lethal butterflies that defended Noth from foreign invaders. She wished him well and knew that, had she not been so entangled in Westeros, she might have joined him. But the illusions of a simple life were beyond her now. She had chosen a different path, one where every day was a careful game of secrets and alliances. She pressed on, forging relationships with powerful figures who came to trust or fear her. She negotiated on behalf of the monarchy with the Ironborn to maintain tenuous maritime trade routes that would keep the capital supplied with fish and goods. She sponsored a fledgling group of scribes and translators in King's Landing, teaching them what she knew, hoping to create an institution that could foster better understanding between Westeros and Essos. She guided certain lords toward more equitable deals with the small folk, not out of pure altruism, but because she believed a stable society benefited everyone. Some nights, she laughed to herself, reflecting on the fact that once she had been a mere translator in chains, and now lords of ancient houses bent their ears to her suggestions. Of course, not everyone viewed her rise with equanimity. There were those who remembered the burning of King's Landing, the thousands who perished under Dragonfire. They blamed Daenerys and, by extension, her closest advisors. Missandei was not the one who gave the order to burn the city, but her loyalty to the queen made her suspect in their eyes. One fiery speech by a certain pious Septon singled her out, calling her a witch from the east who had abetted the Targaryen dragon. Some listened to this rhetoric, fueling resentment. Missandei found that she had to walk carefully among the devout, mindful that religious fervor in King's Landing had toppled leaders before. She sought alliances with moderate Septons, helping them feed the poor through discreet donations, ensuring the faith's hierarchy would at least remain neutral. But there was a coldness in her heart whenever she thought of how Daenerys had died, and the faith that failed to save her. Her relationship with the monarchy itself was a dance of mutual benefit and mutual suspicion. The king or queen, whoever sat the throne in this hypothetical scenario, relied on her skill with foreign powers and her knack for quelling unrest. But they also feared the breadth of her knowledge. She knew secrets from the war that could unravel reputations. She controlled a network that rivaled the official master of whisperers. She had no great house to ground her, no vow of fealty to a lord. She was, in many ways, a free agent with far too much influence for comfort. The question of loyalty hovered in the air. For the moment, Missandei saw no reason to depose or undermine the current regime. Instability would only bring more suffering to the small folk. But she kept her own counsel, uncertain how long this precarious arrangement would hold. All the while, she remembered her queen. In her quieter moments, she would stand at a window high in the Red Keep, looking out over the city as she had that first day, and think of Daenerys. She would wonder what the queen would say if she saw Missandei now. Would she be proud that her former confidant had carried on her legacy of forging alliances, if only in a subdued, covert manner? Or would she rage at the compromises Missandei made to ensure a fragile peace? There was no way to know. Her queen was gone, and Missandei moved forward. Rumors of a new Targaryen claim on the other side of the narrow sea eventually reached King's Landing. A child, allegedly fathered by one of Daenerys's distant kin, was said to have the silver hair and violet eyes of old Valyria. Exaggerations ran rampant, but enough Sellsword companies in Essos began to flock to the child's banner that the monarchy grew alarmed. The crown summoned Missandei for counsel, fearful that an invasion might come. Missandei found herself in the small council chamber, surrounded by skeptical lords and ladies who demanded she uncover whether this pretender was truly of Targaryen blood, and more importantly, whether there was any real threat. She stood before them, composed as ever, and outlined a plan. She would dispatch envoys to Pentos and Volantis, gather hard intelligence, and see how serious the Sellsword threat was. If the child was a puppet propped up by opportunists, it could be resolved by undermining their financial backing. She recommended quiet diplomacy rather than a preemptive strike, which could rally more support to the pretender. The council listened, some grudgingly, but they recognized the sense in her strategy. They gave her partial authority to proceed. In truth, Missandei had been watching this rumor develop long before it became public. She had corresponded with old contacts in Essos, testing their loyalties and gleaning the truth. She suspected the child was not of pure Targaryen descent, perhaps a bastard of a lesser noble from Essos, or a child of a Lyseni who claimed Targaryen heritage. Nonetheless, the child had symbolic power for those who still resented the monarchy's role in Daenerys's downfall. She knew the child's backers might cause chaos, uniting those who yearned for the return of dragons, but she also saw an opportunity to shape the narrative. If she discredited the pretender by leaking certain inconvenient details, proof of their real parentage or questionable origins, she might avert war. Alternatively, if the monarchy refused to enact necessary reforms, she could tip the balance in favor of the pretender, or at least threaten to do so as leverage. Such a path was treacherous. It bore too close a resemblance to the tactics of Littlefinger, who famously played all sides against each other. Missandei told herself she was not doing this for personal gain alone. She wanted to spare the realm another war, to preserve as many lives as possible. If that meant keeping the monarchy in check by wielding the threat of a Targaryen revival, then so be it. King's Landing had taught her harsh lessons. Power belonged to those who knew how to balance competing forces. She had once been naive enough to believe in absolute liberation. Now, she pursued a pragmatic course that she hoped might yield fewer corpses. The swirl of events culminated in a shadow war of influence, waged through letters, bribes, rumors, and covert rendezvous. Missandei found herself corresponding with the child's rumored regent in Pentos, a cunning magister who claimed to act on behalf of the Targaryen heir. She also corresponded with the Iron Bank, urging caution in lending money to a cause that might fail and leave them unpaid. She sent some of her trusted men to Essos to verify the child's identity. All the while, the monarchy waited anxiously for news, pressing her for an update. She realized this was a crucial test. How she handled this crisis would confirm whether she truly rivaled the likes of Littlefinger and Varys. Could she manipulate both sides into a resolution that avoided bloodshed and strengthened her position? Or would she overreach and tear the realm apart? One night, deep in the labyrinthine passages of the Red Keep, Missandei met with a secret envoy from the Targaryen pretender. She never learned his real name. He called himself Sephiros, a flamboyant pseudonym. He was a lean man with slicked hair and a Lyseni accent. He offered Missandei a deal: join their cause, reveal the monarchy's weaknesses, and be rewarded beyond measure when the child took the throne. He invoked Daenerys's memory, saying that Missandei must surely want justice for her fallen queen. Missandei regarded him with a calm, unwavering gaze. "Daenerys Stormborn was my queen and my friend," she said softly. "But the city burned under her. She died for her cause. There was injustice on both sides. Now you come to me with offers of vengeance, cloaked in a child's name. What guarantee do I have that your pretender would not do worse?" Sephiros smiled thinly. You have my word. The child is young, impressionable, guided by those who truly believe in the Targaryen claim to restore peace and prosperity. The monarchy has proven incompetent. You, of all people, must see that. The realm starves while the lords grow fat. He reached into his cloak, producing a small folded parchment. Here, a personal letter from the child's regent. They will confirm everything, and they offer you a seat on the new council should we succeed. You would be able to shape the realm's future in a way your queen never could. Missandei took the parchment but did not open it immediately. And if I refuse? Sephiros' eyes glimmered. We will continue, with or without you, but we would prefer your help. Missandei of Noth. The child's advisors know your worth, your talents. They know how you turned King's Landing into your own. You can either embrace the next Targaryen ascendancy or cling to a dying regime. Missandei nodded, betraying no emotion. She told him she would consider his offer. They parted without violence. She listened to his footsteps vanish into the gloom, the faint echo of ambition. Then she returned to her chamber and stared at the letter for a long time before lighting a candle and reading its contents. The words offered her a place of honor among the child's regents, authority over foreign diplomacy, and the promise of vengeance against those who had betrayed Daenerys. For a moment, she felt the pull of memory. She had truly loved Daenerys, believed in her. Could this be a way to fulfill the late queen's vision? Or was it just another path to more war, more heartbreak? Eventually, she composed her response in coded ink. She neither accepted nor refused. She wrote that she had no love for the current monarchy, but that an open conflict would devastate the small folk. She proposed that if the child was legitimate, they should first seek recognition through peaceful means, building alliances with disaffected Westerosi lords who would push the monarchy toward a power-sharing arrangement. If the monarchy resisted to the point of tyranny, only then should they consider armed force. She offered to broker discreet meetings between certain lords and the child's envoys. In essence, she positioned herself as a mediator, holding the realm's fate in her hands, capable of tipping the scales one way or the other. Whether the child's regent would accept such terms, she did not know, but she intended to force them to adopt a more measured approach. In the meantime, she quietly informed the monarchy of her progress. The child existed, had some measure of backing, and might be amenable to negotiations if handled wisely. She counseled the monarchy to address the realm's grievances swiftly, to show that the child's message was unnecessary. She advised them to pass reforms that lowered taxes on the poor, to invest in rebuilding war-ravaged areas, to open dialogue with the North and Dorne. At first, the monarchy balked. Why should they placate a potential threat? Missandei reminded them that the people's loyalty could not be taken for granted, and that if they ignored the common folk's suffering, a Targaryen banner might once again rally thousands. The Hand, who had witnessed the city's near rebellion after Daenerys' fall, grudgingly recognized the danger. He pushed some moderate reforms through the small council, though less sweeping than Missandei would have liked. Thus, the tension simmered. Missandei's position became more precarious than ever. She was playing a dangerous game, balancing two forces that might go to war. If either side discovered she was secretly corresponding with the other, they might brand her a traitor. It reminded her of the cautionary tales about Varys and Littlefinger. The higher the vantage, the deadlier the fall. Sometimes she wondered if she was repeating their mistakes, but then she recalled the mothers and children who found relief in the bread lines she had helped arrange, or the men in Flea Bottom who no longer lived in terror of daily violence. She had achieved some measure of good, and to her that mattered. Weeks stretched into months. The Targaryen pretenders' cause grew in Essos, but they did not launch an invasion. Instead, they sent secret emissaries to noble houses in Westeros, testing the waters. As Missandei had advised, they sought alliances through negotiation rather than open conflict. The monarchy responded by cautiously implementing further policies that favored the small folk, hoping to quell any groundswell of rebellion. Meanwhile, the realm remained tense but stable. In King's Landing, Missandei's reputation soared. She was whispered of as the true power behind the throne, though she denied any official title. Ardrian Mills became effectively sidelined, overshadowed by her swift and sure handling of intelligence. She fed him just enough to keep him from retaliating, ensuring he could claim small victories now and then. But everyone knew who truly held the city's secrets. It was not the grand vision Daenerys once had, nor was it a perfect arrangement. It was more akin to a balancing act, a realm perched on the edge of potential civil war, with Missandei in the center, moderating extremes. At times, she felt lonely and burdened by the weight of what she carried. She had no living family, no queen to serve, no grand cause except the belief that fewer people should suffer. She found a small circle of companions to share her private thoughts. Ser Kellen Buckwell, Namella Santagar from Dorne, and a few others who had proven themselves loyal. But she never fully revealed the scope of her machinations, unwilling to risk their safety and her own. Little by little, Missandei realized she had become what she once thought impossible, a power broker on the level of Littlefinger and Varys. She wore no great sigil and claimed no seat in the council, yet lords of the great houses courted her favor, foreign powers sought her guidance, and the monarchy itself relied on her counsel. She was the translator still, bridging worlds, Westeros and Essos, monarchy and rebellion, dream and reality. She did not wield dragons, nor an army of Unsullied, nor a storied name like Stark or Lannister. All she possessed was knowledge, empathy, and the unwavering resolve of someone who had lived in chains and refused to be bound again. Sometimes, in the deep of night, she would stand on the Red Keep's ramparts again, staring at the city's lights. She would remember Daenerys standing beside her, the wind tossing their hair as dragons roared overhead. She would recall her queen's fierce determination to break the wheel of noble houses crushing the poor. She would recall the heartbreak of that final day of fire and death. In those moments, Missandei felt a pang of grief that never truly disappeared. But she also felt a quiet pride that she had survived, that she had grown beyond being a mere translator. She was shaping the fate of the Seven Kingdoms, not through brute force, but through the subtle currents of trust and fear, hope and caution. The city that had once ignored her now moved to her rhythm. Still, she knew that any day the precarious balance could collapse. A rash move by the monarchy, a violent gambit by the Targaryen pretender's supporters, or a foreign incursion could plunge the realm into chaos again. She had no illusions of permanent peace, only a fleeting window in which to steer events toward less bloodshed. She resolved to maintain vigilance, never letting complacency seduce her. By the time a year had passed since the day she stepped onto the ramparts and beheld the city, Missandei's presence was firmly entrenched in King's Landing's tapestry of power. She was beyond a mere rival to Littlefinger and Varys. She had taken the lessons of both, Varys's network, Littlefinger's cunning, and added her own empathy and cross-cultural skill to the mixture. Unlike them, she did not plot to sit upon the throne or hold the realm in permanent thrall to her intrigues. She saw herself as a caretaker of sorts, one whose abiding loyalty was to the common people and to the possibility of a better tomorrow. Perhaps it was a dream, but it was hers, and she would see it through as best she could. Her name circulated through the taverns and noble halls alike. Missandei of Noth, the shadow broker of King's Landing, the wise mediator who had turned from slave to savior in the eyes of some, or from translator to threat in the eyes of others. The monarchy's official stance was that she was a helpful advisor, nothing more. But in whispered corners, even the Hand acknowledged that she held more power than any master of whisperers in living memory. For every rumor that she was a saintly figure devoted to peace, another rumor claimed she was orchestrating a Targaryen restoration or shaping the next war to her liking. Missandei did not bother to quell these rumors. Mystery served her better than 1,000 clarifications. Her story continued to unfold in the City of Secrets. She nurtured alliances in Essos, planning for every contingency. She kept close watch on the monarchy, preparing to intervene if they veered toward tyranny or foolishness. She maintained lines of communication with the Targaryen pretender, seeking to prevent an open war. And through it all, she made sure the small folk received a portion of the city's wealth and opportunity, more than they had under previous regimes. It was not a revolution, but a quiet rebalancing, a subtle improvement in the daily lives of many. Perhaps that was enough for now. At times, She remembered Grey Worm, sailing to Noth, fulfilling his promise to protect her homeland. She wondered if the gentle shores of Noth had given him the peace that he, and perhaps she, deserved. Sometimes she mused about leaving the ugliness of kings, landing behind and seeking him out, living a simpler life. But her sense of responsibility kept her here. Missandei felt that as long as the realm lay poised on the brink of chaos, she could not abandon it. Perhaps Daenerys would have expected her to keep fighting in whatever form that took. Or perhaps she simply believed that her talents were needed, and that was enough reason to stay. So she remained in the city of her queen's undoing, weaving a new tapestry of alliances and covert deals, bridging the gap between noble and commoner, Westeros and Essos, monarch and rebellion. In a land of battered kingdoms and exhausted people, her quiet strength shone as a beacon of possibility. She was neither ruler nor subject, neither conqueror nor conquered. She was Missandei of Noth, and she had become, against all odds, one of the most powerful individuals in King's Landing. Cunning as Littlefinger, informed as Varys, but tempered by a compassion and lived experience they had never possessed. And though the city's rancid winds still carried the stench of decay, and the threat of violence still lurked behind every whispered deal, Missandei faced the future with unbroken resolve. She stood at the heart of a realm in flux, determined to prevent it from sliding into yet another bloody cataclysm. If it meant treading the razor's edge of betrayal and alliance, then so be it. If it meant risking her life in dark alleys and hidden corridors, she would accept that risk. She would honor the memory of Daenerys by doing what she could to protect those who had no voice, to guard against tyrants and warmongers. In the swirl of court intrigue and hidden daggers, she found her place, and in doing so, perhaps she found her true self. A breaker of chains, not through fire and blood, but through the subtle, unyielding dance of knowledge and grace.